But tonight we have special guest Emily Ford here to talk with us tonight. Emily is an expert on cemetery conservation and preservation, and she's going to talk about, applying the standards of monument care and tomb care. And hopefully these would be valuable lessons for you all as you're caring for your family graves and family tombs. Emily is a cemetery preservationist, a restoration mason, and an architectural historian based in New Orleans. She is a graduate of the Clemson University Master of Science in Historic Preservation program in Charleston, South Carolina, and is the owner of Oak and Laurel Cemetery Preservation LLC since 2014. Emily has performed hundreds of tomb and monument restorations throughout the Gulf South. She continuously researches and analyzes historical craft and landscapes of historical cemeteries. And she's presented to a number of groups, and we're happy to have her here tonight.
As Stephen said, my name is Emily Ford. I've owned Oak and Laurel Cemetery Preservation since 2014. I have the great privilege to get to do like super nerdy stuff, and then I also get to lay bricks. And I get to do those two things at the same time, which I feel very lucky for. The goal for this presentation is to, I'm going to read from notes for the first half of this because I get really nerdy about this and then I like waste a lot of time. So forgive me for this, but the goal of this presentation is to assist genealogists, historians, and families in caring for their family properties. It's really best to understand the why before we talk about the how, right? So I'm going to begin with some fundamentals on preservation and approaches and why preservation is preservation and not just fixing stuff, right? Professional preservation is guided by the National Park Service under the Secretary of the Interior. It's this office that gives us the definitions for preservation versus restoration versus repair versus conservation. It also gives us the guidelines by which we do this work, and that's the Hippocratic Oath of Preservation. Obviously, the first guideline is to do no harm. The full guidelines are available on this website. I'm going to kind of run through some of the basic ones that are the most applicable in cemeteries. Okay. The historic character of a property will be retained and preserved. This means we don't remove, replace, or add anything that we don't have to. Examples here are metal straps on headstones. We try to avoid doing this kind of stuff because we're introducing a new material into the historic fabric. And you really never know when that, you don't know how long that's going to work or how the material will change over time. So we want to avoid doing this unless we can't avoid it, which sometimes you can. Where the severity of deterioration requires repair or limited replacement of a distinctive feature, new material will match the old in composition, design, color, and texture. This basically means we don't want to replace anything that doesn't have to be replaced. If something's been around since the 1850s, there's no reasons for us to strip something that's made it this far away, right? If we do replace it, we need to make sure that we replace in kind, which means we use the same material as the historic. This comes up a lot when it comes to stucco on tombs. Using modern materials to replace stucco usually causes harm to the structure and it interferes with our understanding of the historic context of the tomb, right? So can everybody see all right here? Okay. So like these are good examples, so say a tomb that had a modern intervention, it sort of takes away, when we look at something like this, we kind of don't really get the historic sense of what it would have looked like originally. Which our responsibility as preservationists is to avoid this false sense of history. Examples of craftsmanship will be preserved. So that basically means it could mean a historic hand-inscribed tablet, right? People don't carve stone the same way they used to. So, if something was carved in the 1850s, we want to retain that. Or this Napoleonville example here, we have a tomb that had very likely had like this nice cornice work, but when somebody came along and did some repairs on the roof, they just kind of stripped it away. So we lose that sort of historic context. Spraying concrete on a tomb will definitely get rid of historic, examples of historic, craftsmanship. So this is, one of the things that we want to make sure that any sort of treatment we're designing, we're avoiding. And then this is the big one. Chemical or physical treatments, if appropriate, will be undertaken using the gentlest means. Oop, I'm so sorry, pardon me. No worries. Gentlest means possible. So especially in cemeteries, we have a lot of approaches. Is it okay if I just shut this door? Okay. We have a lot of approaches that end up being kind of overly harsh on historic fabric. So these are some examples that I have here. This is liquid nails on a tube. Is there a way that we can? Does this kind of come up? I wasn't sure.
You think it's gonna fix?
Okay. That's fair enough. Okay, so liquid nails on a tomb, want to avoid that. Bleach is a really common issue. Bleach on marble will make it look white for a period of time until it turns it yellow and starts to make it dissolve. So we want to avoid that. Pressure washing. This is a really bad example of pressure washing, but really pressure washing anytime on marble is going to remove materials. So we want to avoid that. Caulk on marble. None of these were really approaches that were made by somebody who was thinking, am I going to take the gentlest means possible? So we want to make sure that we're designing any sort of approach of caring for a tomb with these ethics in mind. So that's the ethics of preservation. I'm going to do a quick rundown of materials. Because it's really important to understand what a tomb is made out of before we can care for it, right? Granite and marble, as I'm going to explain, are wildly different materials from one another. So the materials that comprise a monument or a tomb are also tied to the time period in which it was made. So types of building materials or stone are specific to their age. So caring for a tomb from the 1850s is like obviously going to be different than caring for a tomb from the 1950s, right? And so we want to make sure that we are approaching the tomb in the context of its age. So this section includes some basic information about tomb materials, when and where they came from, and how they determine the care of the tomb. So obviously we'll talk about marble. Marble is the most common stone in historic tombs. The type of marble on a tomb says something about the time period in which it was carved. And sometimes a little bit about the person who made the tomb or the family in which it was interred. So this is probably my favorite example of that. This is the Lacoste tomb. For anybody who's driven on Metairie Road, you've seen this tomb. Lacoste himself was a French hairdresser. It's him and his mother who are buried here. It was designed by Albert Weibelin, who was a German stonecutter. This sarcophagus here is actually a replica of a Renaissance style tomb in the Duomo in Florence. It's a replica. And it's carved from Alabama marble from Talladega. So this is a tomb carved from Alabama marble with an Italian copy in here done by a German guy for a French guy, right? So the kind of marble kind of factors into this that I think is just so remarkable. Excuse me.
You're late.
I am. I was learning how to save my roof. Developing.
So, design and the materials, yes. So, marble can be quarried from Vermont, Georgia, Alabama, Italy, Spain, or Asia, depending on the time period, right? Another example of this is this kind of marble, which if you've ever driven past Greenwood Cemetery, you've seen tons of this stuff, this like sort of stripy stuff. This is called Georgia Creole marble. It was quarried out of Elberton, Georgia, out of a quarry that belonged to Albert Weibelin, actually, incidentally. And he owned the quarry from about 1890 to 1930. The reason I mention this is if you have this on your tomb, it was either built between 1890 and 1930, or there was some sort of intervention that was done on it during that period of time, which is a lot of tombs. It also has a real big grain, and it especially does not respond well to harsh cleaning. So that's Georgia Creole marble. Regardless of the time period, Marble is made from, you ready for the science stuff? It's made from a crystalline matrix that's bonded together by alkaline chemical bonds, right? So think about it like a bulletproof vest. If you break one of those bonds by, say, cleaning with bleach, it actually can cause the whole structure to weaken. And that's when we start getting those sort of grains that come off on our fingers, like sugaring. So all marble is like that. That is what marble is. Granite, on the other hand, is an igneous stone. This section used to be huge, by the way. I got really into rocks. I toned it down a lot. But it's an igneous stone that, based on like the scientific hardness rating, it is twice as hard as marble. Simple enough, right? It is also almost, it's like about 50% more heavy too. And although although you still want to be very careful, it can withstand pressure washing, whereas marble is guaranteed to come to harm from it. Granite's hardness also made it much more difficult to carve in the 19th century. So it makes examples of granite tombs from the 19th century very rare. There's pretty much just one guy who was doing that in like the 1850s. I lost my space. Yes. And then one good example of the 19th century granite monument is, of course, the Moriarty Monument in Metairie. So later on in the 20th century, granite becomes a lot more common. We have pneumatic and then power tools where we can cut it and we can quarry it. And also we have like the, globalization of trade. So we have, especially in Asia, quarries being open, fully extracted, and then closing. So this is where we get, especially in like the 70s and 80s moving forward, sort of exotic looking granites that are extremely specific to their time period. So if you have this red granite, your tomb was built in the 70s. Is without question. Or the tablet was put in the 70s. Blue pearl granite is a really lovely example of this as well. It's sort of got this like luminescent quality to it. Quarried in the 1980s and 1990s. So you got that on your tomb, somebody replaced the tablet around that time. Yes, so, I mean, and in general, all of these are pretty hard. They're usually polished. They can stain, but they're not going to stain like marble does. So masonry, type of masonry the tomb is constructed from is also very important. So all concrete and stucco are made from sand, water, and some kind of cement. That's the difference between cement and concrete, by the way. Cement is the stuff that holds the stuff together in concrete. So before 1900, tombs were made, the stuff that cement that held stuff together was lime, right? And this was stuff that was made by burning oyster shells or burning limestone. And it was very porous. It allowed for free movement of moisture and temperature through the tomb. And that's the function of the structure worked that way. Kind of everybody is a little bit familiar here with how a tomb works, like in terms of like burial and stuff. Okay, so this is a tomb, like how a typical tomb is constructed, especially in like this one's an 1880s tomb. But historic tombs go straight down to the ground and usually a little bit lower. There's no vapor barrier. Right, so as temperatures get hot and the ground gets wet, which is pretty common here, moisture actually wicks up through the bricks because bricks are porous, right? Lime stucco and lime mortar allows for that movement up through a tomb structure. So when lime-based construction allows that to happen, in the early 20th century, new cements made from different burned materials become available. And they're all just burned materials. Around the turn of the century, we realized, okay, well, if we burn limestone that has clay in it, then it has a little bit of a stronger quality. This is where we get sort of primitive modern cements. So Rosendale. There was a guy named Dognadine who made these really cool cast concrete tombs around in like the 1920s, 1930s. After World War II, we realized if we burn industrial waste, it makes really hard cements. And so that's like fly ash, steel making coke. It's literally hundreds of times harder than the stuff that we use than lime. It's also much less porous. So most tombs after 1950 are constructed with that very, very hard material. And we usually, there's pretty much no brick involved at all anymore. They're poured, there's rebar on the inside. They're a very different structure than this guy, right? So you wouldn't want to treat them the same. Unfortunately, it's become commonplace to repair and totally encase old lime-based tombs with Portland cement. Yeah, when this happens, all of the, so here we go. So when this happens, all the vapors that would have been able to evaporate from an old tomb are stuck inside, right? Because if you're going to encase a tomb in concrete, you're not going to find a way to dig up underneath it and insert a vapor barrier, right? So all that moisture is still coming up, it just can't get out. And it only accelerates masonry decay. And even worse, it's not really even visible under all that Portland cement until the decay becomes structurally threatening. So this is an example of that. This is a tomb I started working on this weekend. That was totally encased in Portland cement, like completely, like the tomb was painted and they just put a shell around it. So this is 4 inches of cement on what is essentially soil, because that moisture hasn't been able to escape. The whole tomb.
What cemetery is this in?
This is St. Louis too. But what was wild is we were pulling this stuff off and we found that like the whole tomb walls are still there and they're painted black, which is actually really common. I've had one client who's allowed me to replicate black tomb paint. This guy's not gonna let me. But fortunately, at least the wall is still there. But like, however, whatever tomb construction or whatever condition this tomb was in probably, I'm gonna guess the 1950s when it was covered, is nowhere near as bad as it is now. Because it was sort of covered up until it got to a point where we're now, I worry about this tomb until I could fix it. So cemetery preservationists use knowledge of materials and historic contexts to guide the way that we care for tombs and monuments. So with the Secretary of the Interior standards to guide us, we can design treatments to care for cemetery properties that meet our responsibility to do no harm, and preserve tombs and monuments for the future. There we go. Okay. There's a whole world of material science between cemetery preservation, but this is the most essential information that I think is probably necessary to approach when you want to come and take care of your tomb. This is sort of like the basic knowledge, foundational knowledge to make sure that you're approaching it in the safest way possible. So now I'm going to move on to the how-to, which I don't need the script for because I can just rattle on about. How are we doing on time?
Oh, 7:30. We're still.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is where I'm just gonna look at the script. So cemetery preservation is important. It's super easy to get hurt in a cemetery, like sincerely, especially when it comes to monuments. If anything is loose or doesn't look like it's well attached, be very aware of it. Never work on a tomb alone. I don't even do that. Make sure that you bring all personal protective equipment that you need. I live in nitrile gloves. Like I pretty much have a tan line all the time here. You want to make sure that you're wearing eye protection, respirators, especially if you're putting up any sort of like mortar, or stucco, closed-toe shoes, obviously, and bug spray, lots of bug spray, sunscreen, eye protection, everything. Make sure that whatever you are going out to do to your family tomb, you are prepared to protect yourself. Cleaning. So this is, I also brought flyers. I know I sent Steven some, everybody got some sort of basic stuff about cleaning, but as I mentioned, bleach can cause marble to sugar. It also creates this sort of like yellow tint. You can usually tell a stone that's been bleached. Ammonia behaves very similar to chlorine bleach. Pool shock. Just don't use pool shock. It's actually really remarkable that there was a time in like the early 2000s where preservationists used very diluted pool shock. don't use pull shot. Anything with an especially high or low pH is gonna be something you want to avoid. Grinders. Grinders are sometimes, and I mention all of this stuff and these are things that even like monument companies will do. It doesn't mean it doesn't cause harm. It's just, it's that common. So grinders, I've heard some monument companies talk about honing stones, which is essentially grinding off a tiny bit of the front. You don't want to do that. Light pressure washing really is okay for granite only. But if you do have a granite tomb, you don't want to blast the living heck out of it, but granite can probably handle it. Marble cannot. Dues. So basically, for the industry, our standard is what's called D2 biological cleaner. If the website is literally gravestonecleaner.com. I think the Archdiocese sells it as well. It's a good cleaner. It does have a tendency, the way that it treats the biological growth here in Louisiana, when it dies, it sort of flares orange a little bit, kind of scares everybody. It's temporary. If you don't want to have to order something special, any sort of non-ionic cleaner, which ivory, unscented dish soap is a non-ionic cleaner, which means it doesn't bond to the surface of the stone. Also Orvis paste. Is there anybody here who likes to quilt? No? Okay. Orvis paste is sort of a famous quilt cleaner. You can get it at Tractor Supply. You only need a little bit, but you dilute it. It's very good as a cleaner. Whatever you use, make sure that the stone is wet before you apply that cleaner, because especially marble is going to suck whatever you've been scrubbing right into it. So you want to make sure that it's nice and saturated before you apply the cleaner and you scrub. You want to scrub with soft brushes. Tampico brushes are a good one. It's usually what I buy for volunteer programs. So they're like wood, sort of like hand scrubby brushes, Tampico brushes. There was something else. Oh, always make sure that you know where the water is in the cemetery. There's most cemeteries, if they have a water line break, which is typically kind of common, people are going to hit the water lines with their cars. Most cemeteries are going to just shut the water off. So even if there's spigots, you want to just double check before you start cleaning and you realize you can't rinse anything. I usually will pack like a little pump sprayer of water just in case. This should go without saying, but unless you have permission from the property owner or the cemetery, it's best to clean only your family property and not the ones next door. So simply because you never really know when, this is Lafayette Cemetery #1. I was in charge of Lafayette #1 for 4 years as the superintendent. And there are 1,300 lots in that cemetery. I can tell you I've met probably 30% of like people associated with at least 30% of the lots there. You might think a tomb is abandoned and then you can come in and you never really know. So be sure to just work on your family property. Landscaping. Removing vegetation from cemetery lots. This is it really is critical to remove vegetation. That tree is 40 years old. And I'm sure people are familiar with this. If you've ever read the Friends of the Cabildo, New Orleans Architecture, Volume 3 on the cemeteries, there's a photograph of this tomb. That book was published in 1974, and that tree was there. I killed it. It's dead. Well, he killed it, but this is something we really want to avoid. Like, it's really, really important to make sure that something little growing in your tomb is pulled and removed when it's little. You want to be really careful when you remove that kind of stuff, because it can get behind stucco. There was like a long time that when we would do volunteer stuff, we would like encourage people to just like snip stuff back. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can pull, but just be careful. And especially make sure that you are removing anything that is going to become a tree. This is what happens when you don't. This is a tomb that had a tallow tree growing in it. You can kind of barely see it starting to grow here in 2014. And by 2022, it had grown so big it collapsed the tomb. And we ended up having to demolish this tomb. It was awful. If you cut a tree, it doesn't kill it. It actually stimulates it to grow. It's called lion tailing. So you don't want to be in a position where you have to cut something like this and try and kill it. Because at that point, even if you do kill it, the process of those roots decaying is going to cause the tomb to collapse. So nip it in the bud, pull them when they're little. Especially if you have a tomb that has a parapet, check behind the parapet always. That's where they like to grow. Landscape maintenance can often do more harm than good. I was telling Michelle, I was working in Slidell this summer, and most of the work that I was doing for the city of Slidell in this cemetery was caused by their grass crew hitting stuff with mowers. So we want to be really careful with any sort of mechanical means of landscaping, line trimmers, mower impacts. We just want to be thoughtful in how we use those kinds of equipment. We really want to be thoughtful when using herbicide. I mean, obviously you want to wear personal protective equipment if you use herbicide. So Roundup specifically, which is glyphosate, has been shown in studies to accelerate decay in masonry, so that's stone and brick masonry. So you want to avoid doing that. If you need to use it, like, so say you have like a little teeny tree growing in behind your parapet, what we would do is we would actually apply it with a paintbrush. Glyphosate is a foliar herbicide, which means if you pull the plant and then you spray where the plant was, it does nothing. Like it needs to make contact with leaves. So if you apply it to the leaf, glyphosate will work. Another reason we want to be really careful with use of herbicide and overuse of herbicide is it causes erosion. So this is a really good example of that kind of erosion where we have really heavy use of herbicide on one side of a retaining wall, causing enough erosion to sort of make the stability of a very large piece of stone, pretty much just plop right out. And at that point, I mean, that's a very difficult thing to get back in place, right? Headstones, when they start kind of wobbling, herbicide can really accelerate that. So cracks and stucco repairs. One of the best ways to keep a tomb in good condition is to repair cracks when they appear. Old tombs are going to get cracks. They absolutely do. All that moisture coming up into them is going to cause they're not static structures. They do require maintenance. It is much better to maintain a crack by refilling it with something that's going to need to be maintained and refilled later than filling it with something that's going to be so hard it breaks the stone apart or the masonry apart. So I use lime, so that's naturally hydraulic lime. So kind of similar to that early turn of the century materials. That's what I use. It doesn't have to be special ordered. If you have cracks on your tomb, plaster of Paris is based in hydrated lime. I really do recommend using that. It's going to keep anything from growing in those cracks. And it won't do irreversible harm. Painting. So tombs built before the 1950s were painted with oil-based or lime-based paints. And so usually it's very hard to tell. Usually painting them with latex will eventually lead to peeling, especially if you have oil-based paint. It's like I said, it's difficult to tell. This is a very good example of putting probably latex on top of oil. It just causes it to peel like lizard skin. So tombs have also made after the 1950s. Like if you have one of those nice cast concrete tombs, you can paint it all in. You want to make sure that you're scraping any sort of loose stuff off before you do apply paint. Yeah, if it's concrete, like I said, post 1950s, you don't have to be as concerned. Pre 1950s, I use silicate paint, which is a breathable paint, something like Keem, which is becoming a little bit more accessible in the States. Lime wash for your historic tomb is made with type S hydrated lime mixed at a 1:10 ratio to water, and it's painted on the damp walls. It can also be ordered. Most people order it. I've met like one person who will mix their own lime wash. But this is historically what people would have done on All Saints Day. right? They would have come out and they would have lime washed their tomb, at least once a year. These are examples of colorful tombs. This is actually very common. Like I said, the black walls, orange, red, there's some blues and greens out there as well. If you want to replicate colors, by the way, you do want to check the cemetery's rules about that. I only mention that because the archdiocese had to make a rule after that orange tomb. Which is the actual original color for that tomb. But if you have a historic tomb that hasn't been covered in latex, this is a great way to maintain the historic walls of your tomb. And I have plenty of clients for whom I do this every year, which is a lovely thing to be able to do. Whatever you use to paint, avoid painting marble or stone. It usually ends poorly. It can cause moisture to retain. This example here is a pediment stone that not only had latex on it, but it appears at some point. Any of these things that I'm talking about are always done by people who do it in good faith, right? Yeah, somebody just really wants to like do something nice. In this case, somebody wanted to spray paint the entire tomb silver, and including the marble. And it took a lot to have to remove the spray paint from the marble. So you want to avoid having to do that just simply because it's not always reversible. When to call a professional. It's always better to do nothing than to cause harm. Always. Irreversible repairs, incompatible repairs will always be more expensive to fix in the long run. Bleach damage to marble can't be reversed, period. There isn't any way to get it out once it's in there. Well, it breaks apart those little bonds, right? And you can't, those bonds are broken. You can't and they can't be replenished. So best to, if something appears like it can't be, that it's not something that you can do on your own, call a professional. No repair is worth harming yourself over. So good times to call a professional include if there's any instability or risk of material fall. If it's something you don't have enough time to do. Do you ever see like in mechanics shops where they have like the hourly rates and it says like the hourly rate's $100 an hour. If you tried to fix it, it's 150. If you watch me fix it, it's like 200. It's kind of like that. You don't want to end up in a position where somebody has to reverse a half completed repair. If there is, and this is the reality of things, these are tombs. If there's any risk of exposing human remains, you want to call a professional. You want to call the cemetery too. If you have any questions, any of us who work in professional cemetery conservation, like we should feel comfortable explaining to folks how to do this kind of work on their own. I am not the best at responding to emails. I do though. It just takes me a while. And you should be able to reach out and ask any sort of questions to empower yourself to care for your family too. But really, at the end of the day, like, I put together all this stuff and it's like, this is the science of things and this is how we conserve. But really the most important thing is just to visit your tomb often. You really don't have to do anything. I mean, there are some situations where you really should. The most important thing is to be there and to photograph it, to involve your family in it. Even if you think that the younger people in your family aren't interested in it, they will be later. I promise you. Take regular photos. This is really important. If anybody remembers, like 20 years ago, there was like a whole thing about cemetery theft, like lots of statues were removed. When they were recovered, the only people who could recover them were people who had photos. And a lot of these things are catalog orders. So like, you really want to have that kind of, this is not the only reason, but it's really, really important to document your tomb. Keep records in a safe place. Make sure somebody else knows where they are. I think that's how so many tomb titles get lost. Share with family members, but just be there often. That's really the most important part. And this is just me reiterating that. They are the heritage of our community. They are civic landscapes and they are our family legacies. And the best thing we can do is visit them often. Take photos, get involved, and get to know your neighbors. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Can I see that one before that?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We have a question. On, at the mausoleum, that is supposed to have perpetual care.
Uh-huh.
So how do would you have a suggestion on how I follow up with the
This is-
perpetual care?
Is this Metairie on the
Memory
Italian?
mausoleum.
Is it Metairie Mausoleum or?
It's across from Memory Mausoleum.
This is called the Excelsior Mausoleum.
Yes, you're
The
right.
modern looking one.
That's
Yeah,
on
you-
the deed now that you say that.
Yeah, do you know, this is, I'm so glad that you brought this. Have you ever seen photos of what it originally looked like?
No, imagine.
Okay, so for anybody who's been to Italian Row in Metairie Cemetery, you will see this tomb. It's a society tomb. It's next to Cristoforo Colombo tomb. This tomb is actually a tomb from the 1870s that somebody stripped down and coated in Portland cement.
That's right, it needs to be painted outside.
I can show you photographs of how it had it had a cupola. Like, I'll send you my card sheet because my computer's not hooked up to this. But one of the reasons, if you take a very old tomb and you cover it with Portland, it's going to have moisture issues, and I see the moisture issues this tomb is having. I'm not sure what can be done because what happened is,
So this is what
yeah,
find.
it's moisture.
Okay.
You can maintain it by cleaning it
Mhm.
away. But unfortunately, it's always going to have those issues. However, but you can clean it with like say D2, or even like Orbis paste. I think I'll get away with like simple green even, but you can do that. You might have,
You see, this is actually the neighbor.
yeah,
As you can see, I haven't done it. I have,
Yeah.
kind of, but it's constantly.
Yeah.
constantly.
because that tomb is always, that's why they always have the front doors open.
Yeah.
It's always very
And the
moist in
window.
there.
The window's now broken, so where do I go?
I mean, have you spoken to anybody about it?
No, I don't know who to talk to.
Can you come talk to me
I will,
afterwards? And,
after.
yeah, no, because that's,
I'm sorry.
no, this is, you come with a very, very specific, interesting situation that I would love to help you with. So, yeah, let's talk about it afterwards, because I think you might want to talk to Metairie. That tomb has an inherent issue with it that is probably gonna end up having to be Metairie's
Yeah.
responsibility at some point,
Yeah.
but let's talk after.
Okay, great. Thanks, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I'm gonna get Brian's question real quick. What's up, Brian?
Yeah, regarding, plaster of Paris, practical, how does that wear for, compared to, say, another type of,
Like-
not urethane, you wouldn't use that on tube. like
What?
Urethane.
No, I wouldn't. No, because it would just pop off,
Right.
eventually, and then it would be, dude, I just worked on a tomb in, Platinville. And the amount of caulk I pulled out of that tomb, and it was just layers and layers of caulk, and a lot of it I couldn't get. Like, it took a long time, but we were pulling it out. But sure enough, if you try to paint over that, it's going to pop paint off, right? So you're kind of never gonna stop having issues when you put in something that is vapor impermeable or like slick like that. So I wouldn't do that with urethane. That's why I say plaster of Paris, because like, it's not gonna last forever.
Yeah, and I wouldn't use that, urethane, but I was just saying the durability wise.
Well, I mean, there is no such thing as a maintenance-free solution. This is a really great way for us to get into, this is how all of these things happen. Is somebody being like, it's done once and for all. I've seen people use marine epoxy. But plaster of Paris is going to be able to maintain, like, keep a vegetation from growing, at least for like a year, until the next time you visit the tomb. And it's gonna keep that, and it also can help you make sure, if that crack is getting bigger, you should be able to tell. So, I mean, it's not what I would use. I use NHL, which lasts, longer. But also I order it from like Germany, well, actually, that's not true. Masonry Products on Alexander Street sells it. But you get a 60-pound bag for, like, you don't really need that. So that's why I say, like, really, all things considered, plaster of Paris is gonna be your best bet, because it's still vapor permeable. So it's not gonna pop off, because a lot of tombs that have been coated in Portland, those cracks are the only way moisture is coming out. So it's just, which is just gonna keep coming out of those cracks. You had a question?
This is a little bit different. I'm curious about this, and I haven't been able for a long time to deal with my grandmother's tomb. And it's not just my grandmother, it's not a tomb, I'm sorry, it's actually in ground. My brother, before he died, he took really good care of it, and he put pebbles and all on top, and he really worked at it.
Yeah.
And recently I was very sick and I have not been able to do anything. But I really got interested in this, and one of the things I learned after everybody was gone, I got the papers. And I called and I found out that there were people in this tomb, in this, what do you call
And like a coping or like a burial lot?
it? Right, a burial lot,
Uh-huh.
and that I didn't even know.
Okay.
They weren't even family.
Okay.
That I knew of. I mean, the names were people like, I've never heard of them before.
Okay.
No one ever talked about them or anything.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. What was going on then?
So this is a whole nother talk, but I'm gonna,
Next year we'll have you back.
I finally did put together a talk on titles and ownership, which it took me a long time to get around to doing, because that's basically what you're talking about.
Yeah.
All cemeteries are required to maintain, cemetery records are mostly bad. Like in general, you're gonna have a hard time. People, cemeteries are, if they do have the records, most of them are not going to be especially like, disclosing about it. All cemeteries were required from the 1830s, were required to keep a book of deeds. Like, so at the very least, they know who owns a lot. Or at least who owned a lot in 1850, right? And for a lot of y'all's family tombs, that guy from 1850 still technically owns that tomb, and it's the descendants, and then we get into like heirs properties and stuff. That's where I would look. I would ask Metairie who the title, the legal term is title holder of record. I would ask Metairie who the title holder of record is for that lot. And I would go from there. Because the only person who has the right to bury in the lot is the title holder of record, or what's called a successor in interest, which is just the succession, the descendants of that person.
So that would probably be, because I got the paperwork because no one else was there to get it.
Well, okay, so
Nobody actually gave it to me.
is it the original title?
Yes.
Okay, so whose name is on it?
Oh, gosh.
I would check.
I have to-
But well, holding a title doesn't necessarily, you can be, so a tomb title is like a pink slip for a car, right? So you can be unrelated to the guy who's buried in the tomb, or the guy who owned the lot, who bought the lot. But if you hold that title, you can do with it whatever you want. Well, you can at least open it for burials. You can't necessarily sell it. Your name has to be on it.
Well, one of the things that I was curious about was like if someone died, how many years you had to
Oh,
wait
before,
before you could put another person in there?
yeah.
You're in debt.
Well, no. Cemeteries get to make their own rules about that. And Metairie, this is a Metairie, he said, so Metairie is owned by Service Corporation International, which is like it's a multinational funerary corporation. They're huge. For that reason, they tend to have a much higher bar when it comes to that stuff. Like they're gonna make you go through a lot of paperwork. And they also are a lot more interested, frankly, in making sure that you buy property. So they tend to have higher standards when it comes to reuse, mostly because they kind of want that door to sell new property. So you need to check with them. It also depends on the kind of tomb. Like I said, I was in charge of the city-owned cemeteries for the city of New Orleans. Our rule was 2 years, but we ended up changing some of, gosh, it's been so long. In-ground burials were different than tomb burials. If there's a metal casket involved, it's going to be decades, which they usually keep track of that kind of stuff. So bottom line is it's up to the cemetery to make that decision. You're not really going to find any place that allows reuse earlier than 2 years unless you're dealing with cremains, which a lot of burials are cremated remains now.
One family cemetery, well, our family tomb in Dearest, the rule was 10 years because they bought the tomb in 28. Okay, they moved bodies from another tomb to that one. Then in 30, the next guy died. Well, later in 30, another death happened that they wanted to use that tomb. They had to use a different tomb and wait 9 years. before they could move their body into that tomb.
That's a long time. That's interesting, cause like, so I mean, and we don't need to get too into it, but like, historically, the year and a day thing makes a lot of sense because everybody was in a wooden casket and it wasn't sealed and, so like, the process by which a tomb would become reusable was a lot faster. Modern caskets have air seals, which can last a very long time. Embalming, there's actually an enormous amount of plastic involved. So when you're talking about just simply by material, the amount of material in a tomb, I think historically you could use a tomb in perpetuity, right? You could just make it as many burials as you needed to for, generation after generation. That's not necessarily the case anymore. We did have tombs that had so many burials that like just simply the material of the caskets was, we would have to, decades. So it really is up to the cemetery. And it can be specific to the tomb as well. Copings can be different, like vault copings work differently than other copings. It's worth asking the cemetery specifically.
Hey, can you put cremated, I'm just stupid, can you put cremated remains in a regular tomb?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Lots of
I
people
mean,
do.
like if you wanted to go buy one, because they have those, what they call columbariums.
Yeah.
For cremated remains, but can you do cremated remains
In
in
a
a
tomb?
regular tomb?
Oh, of course, absolutely. There's some families, especially, so like Lafayette #1 is a good example because you have tombs that go back to, the 1840s that are still being consistently used by their families. And there's lots of different models for this. Some families will form like family trusts. So there's like one representative who makes these decisions. There's also another sort of informal mod. We always called it the queen of the tomb, like where there's just somebody in the family and it's usually a woman who's sort of like designated as the person who makes the decisions about these things. But there are a lot of, especially the ones that are under trust, basically agreements where the entire family agrees to only use cremated remains. So that way everybody can be buried in the tomb as opposed to somebody kind of taking up a space for a long period of time. Huh? Who holds the record?
Yeah, closest burials in.
So that would be the Smith Vestry tomb in Lafayette #1. It's got 90 burials in it. And I think we actually didn't have to
Our
put
tomb is like 40 chambers, but
Yeah.
267 people in there, so.
Yeah, well, a society tomb's gonna be different. But yeah, I mean, you can do burials for a long period of time. It's just that we do have to be more mindful now about the material, the stuff that.
So when do you get the talk on how to figure out who owns the title of record?
So I did, whenever you guys want me to.
We'll have that.
Yeah. I have it all set up for that. So yeah, I'd be happy to come back to do that.
So mine is just out of curiosity. 3 weeks ago today, I was at St. Louis #1 with visitors who had to see Marie Laveau's tomb. And, famously it was painted pink
Mhm.
years ago.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was that day it absolutely stormed. We had water up to our ankles in the cemetery, so we couldn't hear our guide. I could not hear from her how they removed that pink paint, what kind of pink paint it was.
I could tell.
Okay.
Yeah, so because I worked for Save Our Cemeteries at the time, I was the poor idiot who had to remove all the marks from that tomb.
Oh.
That was like, there's actually a great AP shot of me with like a Q-tip on that.
Okay.
But
And they're starting to market again.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as it used to be.
there's a whole, gosh, there's so much about that. That's just like, it's an
Yeah.
invented tradition. It came up in the 30s. It originated in a tourist brochure.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, the person who painted that tomb pink actually painted another tomb in that cemetery pink as well. He was a person who was an outpatient from a facility. He really did mean well. Like he thought that he was doing like paying honor. At the time, Save Our Cemeteries was like, hey, wait, like we can strip off the paint, but then the archdiocese came and just like pressure washed it, and it actually knocked a lot of the stucco off of it, making it a lot more necessary to restore the tomb. At which point the tomb was restored. That was 2013, 2014, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was latex paint. It was just regular old paint, latex paint. And the tomb was restored with lime wash and lime stucco. Yeah, because it takes a long time for lime to set up completely. Like months, like this is how St. Louis Cathedral was built. but I can't remember, they opened the cemetery to like unveil it, and somebody had come in the middle of the night and scratched on it. And like the company that had restored it was like, had to stomp in there and like patch it. So it's unfortunate that's
Yeah,
happening again.
There's not nearly as many as there, it was covered before it got painted. Right now, there's not that many.
Yeah.
But somebody has managed to get in there and do some marketing.
It's interesting. I wrote an article comparing it to Lovelock bridges in Paris and then the gum wall in Seattle, which is just gross. But like that's participatory vandalism. Like when we visit a place, we want to make a mark on a place, and it usually involves like something little, like the Society for the Relief of Destitute Orphan Boys, tomb in Lafayette #1. Tour guys used to encourage people to like leave gifts for the little boys. The society did not like it. They're still around. But what will people do? They'll take the most convenient thing that's in their bag. So lipstick, crayons, stuff that melts on the tomb. There's the same thing with Marie Laveau. It's a very simple thing. There's very low barrier. You don't have to prepare for it. Of course, you have like lipstick or something to scratch with. So it scratches an itch. So I'm not surprised that people.
Yeah. And in case anyone's interested, that's also where, the new pope's great grandparents are buried. It's in a corner. Take the tour. It was actually very interesting. I mean, I had never been to that cemetery in particular. So.
Too close.
How do you decide which tomb you're gonna redo?
Oh, I work for families. I get hired by families.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I
So
thought it was like, like somebody important that would,
No.
So you are so if
Yes.
I wanted to get something restored, I'd
Yes.
call you.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah. So I work in the New Orleans cemeteries. Typically when I work in New Orleans cemeteries, I'm working for families. I work for cemeteries like. So like I've been working lately for the St. Joseph Cemetery Board in Baton Rouge. And so like with that cemetery, I wrote out like, okay, here are your priorities based on the condition of tombs, the uniqueness of the structure, so on and so forth. Here are the costs to it. They've used it as a fundraising tool. And so now they've kind of gone through. So in some cases I work for agencies. I work for the University of West Florida sometimes, but yeah, here usually. Thank you so much, guys, for your.